Isla Fisher breaks her silence. The truth behind the divorce from Sacha Baron Cohen. A one-year marriage of pain. Isla Fisher crumbles under the weight of the truth. For years, she smiled through the premieres, the red carpets, and the magazine interviews. Isla Fisher, the flame-haired darling of Australian cinema, was the image of calm, witty composure. But behind that polished exterior, behind the well-curated photos of laughter and luxury, Isla was carrying a pain far deeper than the public ever imagined. A pain that stemmed not just from a once thriving career that slowly began to falter under Hollywood's relentless pressure, but from a marriage that had turned from fairy tale to farce. And finally, to fracture. It wasn't always like this. Isla met Sacha Baron Cohen at a party in Sydney in the early 2000s, both of them young, mischievous, and full of fire. Their chemistry was instantaneous. To the outside world, it was a quirky match made in comedic heaven. The wild satirist and the poised, versatile actress. When they married quietly in Paris, Isla gave up much of her spotlight to support Sacha's wild, boundary-pushing career. She converted to Judaism. She took a step back from leading roles. She raised their children away from the chaos of Los Angeles. She did what she believed was right. She chose love. But love, as she would later learn, isn't always enough. While Sacha traveled the world pushing his bold characters into political storms and media spectacles, Isla was often left behind, not just physically but emotionally, creatively, spiritually. Offers for roles became fewer. Scripts that once landed in her lap began to pass her by. Industry insiders whispered that she had disappeared. But what they didn't know was that Isla was still working, not just in film, but in her most difficult role yet. Keeping her family intact while silently battling the weight of betrayal, neglect, and a growing sense of invisibility. The truth began to surface quietly at first. Missed red carpet appearances, vague social media posts, strained photographs where the sparkle in her eyes had dulled. And then came the rumors about Sacha's emotional distance, his obsession with work, his refusal to slow down even when Isla begged for a pause, for presence, for partnership. She had always known that marriage to a man like Sacha would come with eccentricity, but she hadn't expected emotional abandonment. Professionally, Isla tried to reclaim her identity. She threw herself into voice work, tried her hand at writing, even took on a few small indie projects. But something had shifted. The industry had moved on. Hollywood's brutal shelf life for women, especially mothers, especially wives of powerful men, had caught up with her. She was no longer the ingenue. And worse, she was no longer being seen at all. Then, one night in early 2025, came the breaking point. It was supposed to be a quiet family dinner. Just Isla, Sacha, and the kids. A rare night in. But a single glance at his phone, left face up on the kitchen counter, changed everything. What she saw, or perhaps what she finally allowed herself to acknowledge, wasn't just one message or one woman. It was the confirmation of years of being sidelined. She wasn't paranoid. She wasn't imagining it. The emotional distance had a name, a face, and a history. And Isla, in that moment, knew she could not stay any longer. Not for the children, not for appearances, not for love that no longer protected her. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. Isla Fisher, the woman who had once tumbled and laughed her way through comedic roles with sparkling eyes and boundless energy, simply sat down, in silence. For the first time, the pain didn't need a performance. The announcement came weeks later, a joint statement, as Hollywood dictates. Polite, muted. We have made the difficult decision to end our marriage. But there was nothing polite about the storm that had brewed for years in Isla's heart. Friends close to her said she had finally started sleeping again. that she'd begun seeing a therapist, that for the first time in a decade, she had time to think about herself. And yet, the public still didn't know the full story. They didn't know the extent to which she'd sacrificed herself, her ambition, her dreams, her voice, in exchange for a marriage that ultimately fed only one career. They didn't know how many nights she sat awake, reading scripts by the dim glow of her phone, wondering if it was too late to try again. They didn't know how often she told herself, just a little longer, for the children. What they saw was the headline, Isla Fisher and Sacha Baron Cohen divorce after 1 year of marriage. But what they missed was the deeper tragedy, that the 1 year of official marriage was only the last straw. The disintegration had been a slow, quiet undoing, 1,000 tiny heartbreaks, 1,000 silences, 1,000 compromises made in the dark. Now, for the first time, Isla is speaking, not with interviews or Instagram posts, but with the sheer act of leaving, walking away. She is no longer the accessory to someone else's narrative. She is reclaiming the script of her life, one painful rewrite at a time. But the path ahead is not clear. Isla is 49 now. The industry she once conquered doesn't always forgive time, motherhood, or quiet rebellion. And the wounds of betrayal, of being made to feel small, unworthy, unseen, they do not heal quickly. Especially not when they come from the person you once believed would protect your heart like it was their own. There are whispers she's writing a memoir, that she's planning a return not just to acting, but to directing. That this pain, raw, unfiltered, and finally named, will become fuel. But Isla, ever guarded, says nothing. She lets the silence linger, because sometimes silence is the loudest scream of all. And as the world speculates, watches, wonders, she simply takes a breath and begins again. She wakes up before dawn now. Not because she has to. The kids are older, independent enough to make their own breakfast, but because silence at 5 a.m. feels different than silence at noon. It feels sacred. It feels earned. Isla Fisher sits by the window of her Sydney home, a chipped blue mug in her hands, tea going cold, watching the jacarandas tremble in the breeze. The ocean isn't visible from here, but she can smell it. Salt. Eucalyptus. A hint of something else. Something that smells like possibility. Even after everything. There's a small notebook on the table. Worn leather. Corners frayed. It's filled with bits of dialogue, character sketches, strange half-sentences that no one else would understand. She started keeping it again 2 weeks after the divorce papers were signed. Not for a movie, not for a role, just because she needed to remember how to invent again, how to build something from nothing, not for someone else's script. This time, the lines would be hers. The kitchen still has his favorite mug. It sits untouched. She doesn't throw it out, not because she's sentimental. She isn't, not anymore. But because grief is stranger than people admit. It doesn't demand fire or fury. Sometimes, it just means letting an object sit quietly, collecting dust, until one day you don't notice it anymore. That mug with the little crack on the handle tells part of the story. And Isla, for all her strength, hasn't yet reached the chapter where she stops rereading old pain. When she walks through Paddington, people still do double takes. She's smaller than they expect, finer, as if grief had shaved something off her frame, something invisible but essential. But there's also a new sharpness to her. In her gaze, in the way she carries her tote bag, not like an accessory, but like a shield. She wears sunglasses even when it's cloudy, not to avoid being recognized, but because she's learning how to look at the world without constantly being looked at in return. A friend invites her to a charity gala. She declines. Not yet. She's not ready for red carpets, for people leaning in and whispering, "You look amazing. How are you?" with that knowing tilt of the head. As if the correct answer is always, "I'm fine, of course." But Isla has no interest in being fine anymore. She wants to be truthful, even if it's messy, even if it's quiet. At night, after the kids go to bed, she walks through the house barefoot, letting the cold of the wooden floors remind her that she's still alive. The house echoes in a new way now. His voice used to fill the space, booming, theatrical, always on. Now, there's space for other things, for silence, for music, for her own laughter. On the nights she can't sleep, and there are still many, she reads old letters, not love letters, letters to herself, notes she wrote on hotel stationery, on napkins, on the back of scripts, promises, warnings, tiny truths she hadn't wanted to face back then. There's one letter she keeps in her nightstand drawer, dated 2017. "I'm vanishing," it begins. "Every day I'm shrinking a little more. I smile when I'm meant to. I nod. I cheer for his successes. But I can't find myself in any of it anymore." She reads it and doesn't cry. Not now. The tears came years ago. What's left now is a kind of reverence for the woman who saw the truth and wrote it down, even if she didn't yet act on it. The kids ask questions sometimes, not direct ones, they're clever, and children always know more than we think. "Will Dad be here for Christmas? Why don't we live in London anymore?" Isla answers carefully, not with lies, but with soft edges. She will not poison them with bitterness. That, too, is a kind of love. Every few days, she gets emails from her agent. Scripts, offers, invitations. She doesn't delete them. She reads them slowly, without urgency. There's a role that catches her eye, a woman who's lost everything but refuses to be defeated. It's not a glamorous part, not a big paycheck, but it feels true. And that, lately, is all Isla wants. In the garden, she's begun planting again. Tomatoes, lavender, some native grass she can't name but loves for its wildness. She kneels in the dirt, fingers stained brown, and wonders if this is what starting over really looks like. Not with a grand speech or a movie comeback, but with small acts of care, with watering, with waiting, with letting the sun do what it does. Sometimes she puts on her old movies, Wedding Crashers, Confessions of a Shopaholic, not out of vanity, but curiosity. She watches that younger version of herself, so full of energy and hope, and wonders what she'd say now. Would she recognize this woman here in the quiet house, building a life from ashes? There's a scene in one of those films where her character chases a man, believing it to be love. Isla watches it now and shakes her head gently. No chase is worth the cost of losing yourself. She writes every morning now, sometimes for hours, sometimes just a paragraph. She's working on something, a screenplay maybe, or maybe a letter. To her children, to herself, to the woman she used to be. She hasn't decided. All she knows is that the words are hers. The neighbors don't ask too many questions. Australians are good like that. There's a kind of unspoken code, respect for privacy, especially when someone's been through something hard. They wave, they smile, they let her be. And Isla, in turn, lets herself be. There's still pain. Of course there is. Healing is not a straight line, not something you tick off like an errand. Some nights it floods back unexpectedly. A song, a smell, a photo on someone else's Instagram. But the difference now is that Isla doesn't run from it. She lets it wash over her, and then she breathes. She breathes, and then she writes another sentence. There are still entire days when Isla Fisher says almost nothing at all. Not out of sadness necessarily, but because she's learning how to sit in the stillness, how to exist without needing to explain herself. After a lifetime of being watched, adored, scrutinized, and softened for public consumption, there is power in saying nothing, in being unreadable, in becoming something, someone that no one can quite name anymore. There's a woman who walks past her house every afternoon around 4. Mid-50s, always wearing the same brown cardigan, always carrying a plastic bag that crinkles with each step. Isla has started watching her from the kitchen window. Curious. Once their eyes met. The woman gave the smallest nod. There was something in that glance, recognition, maybe, or warning. Isla hasn't decided which. She doesn't talk much about the divorce, not even to her closest friends. They ask, gently, and she smiles, says she's doing okay. But behind her eyes is something heavier, more elusive. A memory she hasn't shared, a truth she's still sitting with. There are whispers that it wasn't just distance that broke them, that something happened. Something Isla doesn't want in the papers, something she keeps buried under layers of domestic routine, gentle parenting, soft denial. On her phone, there's a draft email, untitled. It's been sitting in her drafts folder for months. It begins, "There's a version of this story that people will accept, and then there's the version I lived." She hasn't sent it. She doesn't know if she ever will. But sometimes she opens it at 2 a.m., just to remind herself that the truth is hers, that even if she never speaks it aloud, it still exists. At the grocery store, she runs into an old colleague. He doesn't recognize her at first. She's wearing no makeup, her hair tucked into a scarf, a reusable bag slung over her shoulder. But then their eyes meet. "Isla?" he says cautiously. She smiles, says hello. They chat for a few minutes, and then he says it. "You seem different." She laughs politely, but her eyes go distant. He doesn't know the half of it. There's an old photograph in her bedroom drawer, taken during a press tour in 2010. Isla in a green dress, Sacha beside her, arm around her waist. She's laughing, but she can see now, the angle of her shoulders, the tension in her jaw, that something was already pulling apart. People had said they were the perfect match, that she grounded him, that he made her laugh. But they didn't see the rooms behind the red carpets. They didn't see the silence after the laughter, or the nights she waited for a call that never came. She started swimming again. Early mornings, saltwater pool, no one around. It's something she hasn't done in years, not since the early days in Perth, when she was just a teenager with wild curls and even wilder dreams. In the water, she feels weightless, as if time softens, as if she's not defined by the last headline or the next project. Just breath and motion, and something that feels like remembering. Sometimes she imagines what people think of her now. Do they feel sorry? Curious? Is she still Isla Fisher, the actress, the wife, the redhead with the quick wit? Or has she become something else entirely? Something quieter, more watchful, the kind of woman people whisper about, but don't fully understand. There's a painting she keeps in her study, abstract, all dark blues and bleeding reds. No one knows where it came from. It wasn't expensive, but there's something about it. A storm trapped behind glass that feels familiar. She stares at it when the words won't come, when the memories start to swirl too loud in her head. Her therapist once asked her, "What are you most afraid of?" She didn't answer. She looked out the window and said, "What happens if I stop pretending?" There are boxes in the attic she hasn't opened yet, labeled in thick black marker. Wedding, Paris, Tour, 2012 MSc. She knows what's in them. Dresses, letters, maybe even the necklace he gave her on their first anniversary. But something in her resists opening them, not because of the pain, but because she's afraid they might mean nothing now. And what would that say about all those years? A journalist emailed her last week, said they were doing a retrospective piece on her career, wanted a quote, a reflection, maybe even a coffee. Isla didn't respond. She reread the message 6 times, then archived it. She knows what they want, a soundbite, a confession, something neat. But there's nothing neat about the last 12 months of her life. The children are okay. At least, she hopes they are. They're resilient. They laugh. They draw pictures. Sometimes they ask, "Will we see Daddy this weekend?" And she says, "Maybe, sweetheart." But inside, a small part of her breaks every time. Not because he isn't present, but because she doesn't know how to explain absence without sounding cruel, or without revealing the part of her that still aches for something impossible. On her nightstand is a copy of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. She's read it twice now. Something about the unnamed narrator, the lingering ghost of another woman's presence, the feeling of being haunted by someone else's choices. It resonates. She wonders if Sacha ever read it. Probably not. He was always more into satire, always laughing, always on. She used to love that about him. Now, she wonders if she mistook performance for presence. There are moments, flashes, where she thinks she hears his voice, in the hallway, in a dream. Once, at a cafe, she was sure she saw the back of his head. Her stomach dropped. But when the man turned around, it was a stranger. Older, kinder looking. She didn't realize how tightly she'd been holding herself until she exhaled. And yet, for all the questions, the unresolved wounds, the quiet fury, there is something else now, too. A whisper of strength. A sliver of mystery. The sense that she's standing at the edge of something vast. Not ruin, exactly. Not rebirth, either. Just possibility. She doesn't know what comes next, but she knows this. She will no longer be written by someone else's hand. She will no longer apologize for becoming someone they didn't expect. And she will no longer pretend that what happened, all of it, didn't change her. The notebook grows thicker by the week. There are no titles yet, no outlines, just fragments. One of them reads, "She walked into the world quietly, but she was carrying a storm." And that perhaps is all we need to know. Some nights, Isla leaves the porch light on, even though no one is expected. It's an old habit from a time when Sacha would return from shoots at unpredictable hours, a way of saying, "I'm still here. You're still welcome." Now the light glows for no one in particular. It spills onto the steps, painting the wooden planks gold, casting soft shadows across the potted herbs she planted herself. A subtle invitation, or perhaps a quiet plea. Don't forget me. Don't mistake my silence for absence. She doesn't speak of him anymore. Not in full sentences, anyway. Sometimes a friend's name will slip into conversation, and she'll offer a small, non-committal shrug. "We haven't spoken in a while." Or, "He's busy with work." But the truth is, she doesn't know where he is most days. She doesn't ask. The maps of their lives no longer overlap. Just parallel lines, close enough to remember, too far to return. The emails from her agent are less frequent now. Not because the offers have stopped, but because Isla has stopped replying. Scripts arrive in envelopes that sit unopened on the hallway table. She tells herself she'll get to them eventually. But what would she play now? The wife? The woman scorned? The comeback queen? The roles no longer fit like they used to. Her silence is no longer passive. It's deliberate. A choice. A refusal to be reduced to tropes. But that doesn't mean she's stopped performing. She's just changed her stage. In the early hours of one morning, long before the sun has reached the coastline, she walks barefoot across the tiles to her desk. The house is completely still. Only the soft hum of the fridge. The occasional rustle of wind through the open window. She sits down, opens the notebook again. The same one. It's heavier now, filled with ink and half-thoughts and underlined phrases that make her heart pause when she rereads them. Tonight, she writes something she doesn't quite understand. What if the end wasn't betrayal? What if the end was the moment she stopped needing to be understood? She stares at the words for a long time. They don't comfort her, but they feel true. Outside, a dog barks in the distance. Then silence again. She closes the notebook and runs her fingers through her hair, as if trying to untangle something deeper than just strands. For a moment, she considers calling someone, her sister, maybe, or that one friend in Byron Bay who always says the right thing without pushing. But she doesn't. Not tonight. Tonight, the ache feels necessary, like it's reminding her she's still inside the process, not past it, not healed, just somewhere in between. There's a letter she's written and rewritten 100 times, to him. Some versions are raw and cutting, others forgiving. Some ask questions she knows will never be answered. Some don't ask anything at all. Just some statements like, "I deserved more," or "I don't regret the years, only the silence that swallowed me whole." She's never sent it. Maybe she never will. In the garage is a box labeled simply, Voice. Inside are old dictaphone tapes, voice notes from film rehearsals, lines she once delivered with conviction. She plays one now and hears her own voice from 10 years ago, younger, brighter, a little more naive. "I can't do this anymore," the voice says. It's from a scene in Now You See Me, but it sounds different now, like a prophecy, like a future version of herself trying to send a message backwards in time. She sits with that voice, with her own words, then turns it off. The room returns to silence. The children have adjusted in their own way. One of them has started writing little plays in a notebook. "You're not allowed to read it," she says, hiding it under her bed. Isla smiles, not because it's cute, but because she understands. The need for privacy. The need to create something that belongs only to you. They are growing up inside this shifting house, with their own stories forming. Stories Isla can no longer control or predict. But that, too, is love. Letting go of the ending you imagined. She visits a gallery one afternoon. Alone. No makeup, hair pulled back into a bun, oversized jumper. There's a new installation. A hallway of mirrors, each cracked differently, each distorting her reflection in some unsettling way. She stands before one for a long time. This one makes her look taller, thinner, like someone else entirely. A woman without children, without grief, without a past. She doesn't linger, but she doesn't look away either. Outside, the sky is beginning to shift, painted in the colors of endings, bruised purples, amber streaks, that in-between blue, where day and night meet like strangers in passing. She walks along the footpath, her shadow stretching behind her like a second self. Familiar, but never quite attached. There are rumors again. Online forums, tabloid teasers. Isla's quiet comeback? Mysterious new project? Seen with new love? She reads them with a detached curiosity, like reading fiction. Like flipping through a book you once loved but can't remember why. Sometimes she imagines the story from the outside. The girl who gave everything. The marriage that didn't last. the betrayal, the silent retreat, the whispered return. But that's not the story she's living. Hers is slower, less dramatic, more like a song you hear in the distance, just loud enough to know it's beautiful, but never quite loud enough to make out the lyrics. At home, the kettle boils. She pours herself a cup of tea and steps out onto the back deck. The wind carries the scent of rain. Somewhere down the road, a car door slams. She doesn't look. Instead, she focuses on the jacaranda tree, the same one from all those months ago. Its blossoms are starting to fall now, scattering across the lawn like lavender snow. She watches them drift, one by one, as if each petal is a small, quiet decision being made by the world without her consent. There's peace in that, she realizes, in not knowing, in letting the story unfold without needing to write the ending, in allowing mystery to breathe. She sips the tea, eyes tracing the lines of the fence, the movement of the trees, the fading light. Somewhere, in the distance, a train hums past. She doesn't know where it's going. And for once, she doesn't need to. The notebook remains closed on her desk. The letter unsent. The door unlocked. The porch light on. And the story, still writing itself.